Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Jen Budd. I am a former senior patrol agent with the United States Border Patrol, and I talk about the truth about the United States Border Patrol. This is going to be a continuation of the Critical Incident Team series that the U.S. Border Patrol used for over 3 decades to secretly cover up shootings and use of force incidents, everything from sexual assaults to just on and on and on. And somebody asked me why I'm doing this because, I don't make any money doing this. And it's because I'm obligated to do this. I knew about these teams when I was a young agent, and I didn't come forward back then. And even when I did try and come forward about the other things I knew about, I was always shut down, obviously, and pushed out. So it's not like they would have done anything about this. Nobody would have believed me. And I never honestly had the documents to do anything with it like I do nowadays. So I'm doing this just out of duty. I think that these teams are disgusting. I think this is a disgrace. As somebody who swore an oath to the Constitution and to the laws of the United States. And I made a promise to a lot of the families, specifically to the family that I'm going to talk about today. Well, not talk about them, but the case that they were involved with. And so when I do these, I've already written my analysis up on this case. It's the last piece I did, the Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez case. And you can read that, but I also do videos because I understand for a lot of people it's easier to listen or to watch videos. So before we get started, let's remember this is about the U.S. Border Patrol. Border Patrol agents are the people in green in between the ports of entry. CBP agents CBP is the parent agency, but CBP agents are typically the men and women at blue that you see at the ports of entry. And the Border Patrol has used these illegal and unauthorized critical incident teams as sort of evidence gathering, evidence technician teams. And over the years, then the actual agencies that do have the legal right and jurisdiction to investigate these crimes being committed by Border Patrol agents started to use these teams as their own evidence teams. And this is the best example so far that I've been able to find. And it's a complicated case, but for the purposes of this, I don't want to talk about this entire case front to back. These cases are so complex and so big that to do them justice would need a series of podcasts. It would need a book to get everybody's perspectives and everything that was going on in that time. And I want to get these cases in as far as the critical incident teams, what they did, what their actions or inactions were, how they affected the case. It's not that I'm not interested in the rest of the story. I am very much interested in all aspects of these cases, but it can be a little bit too much for people. It would be hours and hours of this on the podcast. So I am solely concentrating on the actions of the critical incident team. I'm not trying to determine guilt or innocence or this or that, or I'm only looking at the actions of the critical incident teams of the Border Patrol, and knowing that they had no authority from Congress, no authority or permission from the Attorney General of the United States, and they created these teams as cover-up teams. And then these teams have now, as I said, during the Biden administration, just been covered up even more and rolled into CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility, which is run by an ex-Border Patrol agent. Let's get started on the Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez case. As before, I'm going to read some of the article that I wrote, just simply because it is a little bit easier. I've already invested all this time into organizing the story. So the critical incident team for this sector, this is Tucson sector, it started in the early to mid 90s. It was created by John Buscaglia, as he mentioned. So what you're going to see here is the result of all of the preparation and everything that John Buscaglia was doing in Tucson sector to create the critical incident team. And Tucson sector has always been very, I call it the rapey sector, but it's also just very corrupt, just tons and tons of agents arrested in the Tucson sector. So I want to start off by giving you just kind of a general idea of how this happened. Jose Antonio was a 15-year-old boy. He lived in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, which is just on the other side of Nogales, Arizona. And he was walking along a street in Mexico that butted up right on the border with the fence with a big tall wall. And he was walking, going to see his brother who worked there just around the block. And that was a common thing. They used to go hang out after work and they would eat hot dogs and goof around and play video games and stuff like that. And his brother was not there that night. His brother had decided to go hang out with a girlfriend. And so he was walking back home. Suddenly he was shot in the head, in the back of his head, and in his back 10 times, at least 10 times. And what had happened is just prior to him getting there, two men, assumed Mexican men on the Mexican side, had taken some backpacks that were filled with marijuana, and they had climbed the fence and jumped over and run north to an area and dropped them off where somebody else would come and pick up the dope. And there is a camera only 150 yards from here. There's a couple cameras up on Border Patrol cameras up on these tall poles. And it saw all this, and the camera operator called this out. And there were two Nogales PD officers. One was a K-9 officer. And then there were a couple of Border Patrol agents. The Border Patrol agents who were assigned to that area got out on foot and went after the dope. The dope smugglers who had come north ended up going back south, and the camera operator stated this over the radio. They're going back south. And then there were reports that then either those two men or two other men, they were trying to get back south and stuff. There were rocks being thrown from Mexico up over the 20, 30-foot fence. At the time it wasn't the 30-foot, so it was probably 20-foot fence at the time, over that, and then endangering the officers, whether they be Nogales PD or Border Patrol. And all of a sudden, Border Patrol agent Lonnie Schwartz, who was not assigned to this area, he was assigned a quarter of a mile away at the port of entry. And he says he heard the radio traffic from, these guys are coming north with dope. And he gets in his car and he drives over there. And he gets out of his car and, according to testimony that we'll talk about, walks up to the fence, walks up to the wall. And this is, even though this isn't the current 30-foot wall, it is a more modern wall. Maybe it's smaller than that, but it still has the bollards where you have 3 inches in between each bollard. And you also have to understand that on the Mexican-U.S. line, like as you're looking down the line, Mexico's on my left, U.S. is on my right. There's a drop from the U.S. side where the fence is going up, the wall's going up, and then there's like this giant drop where it's dug out and the street is way below. So in order for anybody to throw a rock, they would not be able to throw it at the fence and get it through the fence, any decent size. It would have to be less than 3 inches wide for somebody to get it through there and hit an officer or an agent. But they weren't doing that. They were throwing it up and over. And so they ended up becoming a lob. It's not to say that it couldn't hurt you, but it could. But the truth of the matter is no Border Patrol agent has ever been killed by being hit by a rock. That's just the truth. It's not to say that it isn't scary, and some agents haven't been hurt seriously. They have. And at the same time, Lonnie Schwartz, he empties his gun and he moves down as he's shooting. So he stops and he shoots and he moves down and he shoots some more and he moves again. I think he ended up something like 16 bullets. He shot, reloaded. He was a very good shooter. And he had several incidents in the past where instead of firing into Mexico, he used non-lethal. So he would fire like pepper balls or something into Mexico. And so there were quite a few incidents of this with this one agent in particular. And so he drives over there and he does that. And his response was, well, I heard that agents were hit, and I heard that when I got out of my car that the canine dog had gotten hit. And you'll see later on that no, none of that happened. So let's remember, before we get started in this, the appropriate and the legal way for Border Patrol agents to address use of force cases is to tend to the victim, first of all, and anybody else who needs medical attention. Calling in supervisors. The supervisors are supposed to call all city, county, state, and federal authorities who have jurisdiction. They can decline the case and somebody else can take it in that chain, but all are to be notified. And in this case, they did not notify anybody other than the FBI and federal authorities. They did not notify any local or state authorities. And you're supposed to, so once the injured people are taken care of and they get out of the way, you're supposed to identify witnesses, make sure the evidence is where it's supposed to be, but not touch it, not mark it, not do anything else, stand where you are, not drive through the evidence, not tell victims or witnesses to go away, none of that stuff. You're just supposed to sit there and wait until the people who do have the authority come in and investigate. But that's never what happens in the Border Patrol because we set up these cover-up teams. So this is actually a really good example of what happens when a U.S. Border Patrol agent kills on duty. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to set the narrative. Every single Border Patrol use of force case that I have studied, the agent using the force has to justify using that force by claiming that they perceived a threat either against themselves or somebody else, and then therefore they had to act. So a lot of times when you see that a Border Patrol agent has killed somebody, you'll see that they claim that they're the victim, even though the evidence overwhelmingly shows that the Border Patrol agents were not the victim. They will always claim that they are the victims. So carefully constructing the narrative to be the way that the U.S. Border Patrol wants it to. This starts with Border Patrol and CBP's serious incident reports. It's also called significant incident reports. I've seen it called both things, but they're SIRs. And then they also have something called a use of force report. And those two narratives, they tend to convey some facts, like they're pretty good on times and when people show up to the scene and things like that, who all was called. And they'll kind of give you a gist of it, but they're not going to contain anything that would make their agents look like they did anything wrong. So there will be some facts in it, but it will also be filled with things that tend to justify the reason for the agent shooting or tasing or whatever it was that the agent did. Most often, the supervisors and the managers in the Border Patrol just kind of conveniently leave facts out. And I think a lot of managers, and I did a couple stints as an acting supervisory Border Patrol agent, so I understand these a lot. I think a lot of supervisors, a lot of people would say, well, that's just a preliminary investigation and it's the beginning. And so sometimes there are things that later on you find out, okay, that was a mistake and this and that can be true, except for the fact that these significant incident reports, serious incident reports, SIRs, they're updated months after the incident, including even years after the incident. And so the goal isn't to update it and make it correct and fix maybe the mistake. Okay, now we see that this and this is what's happened. It's to give you more plausible deniability. So as they update it over the years, they're only putting in things that they feel are going to reflect on the Border Patrol in a positive way. A good example of how these SIR reports have false information in it is this one. They stated that the Nogales PD officer, John Zuniga's canine, was hit by a rock. This was eventually proven in court and by the handler's own testimony to not be true at all. The report also assumed that the person killed, Jose Antonio, threw rocks without any evidence other than the word of Agent Schwartz, who was not even present when the incident started. Here's the thing that the Border Patrol in the serious incident report, they say there's only 4 witnesses to what happened. The 2 agents running for the marijuana and the 2 officers who were standing there, clearly seen in the camera from the Nogales PD. They say those are the only witness statements to the shooting incident that happened, because critical incident teams and the Border Patrol does not consider evidence and witness testimony from anybody outside ourselves to be valid. So we never include migrant testimony. You rarely ever see Border Patrol agents, these critical incident teams, interviewing the victims. You rarely, like they didn't interview any witnesses on the South Side because they don't care, because it doesn't matter. So even though The canine officer says, "No, Agent Schwartz's testimony is not correct. My canine wasn't hit and there were no injuries," because Agent Schwartz keeps swearing that he heard somebody say that. But Border Patrol agents speaking to the press repeated these statements so often that the media routinely reported that Jose Antonio was throwing rocks, although at least 3 witnesses who were never interviewed by the critical incident team investigators stated Jose Antonio was just walking and had nothing to do with the guys who were throwing rocks. It's just like the Border Patrol's not even going to consider that Agent Schwartz might have shot somebody who was not throwing a rock. It's just not going to do it. Even though the testimony given by Agent Schwartz is proven by the other officers there to not be true. In the serious incident reports, significant incident reports, you see how they created that idea of Jose Antonio throwing rocks. The very first article comes out by Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star. So in that article, he talks about the 2 marijuana smugglers, how they dropped off their loads on the U.S. side and how they returned to Mexico. While that is being told to him by a Border Patrol agent, a press information officer. In this first article written about the case, what sets the narrative in this case that lasts for many, many years is that Jose Antonio was throwing rocks, even though he was never proved to have been throwing any rocks. The Border Patrol, every time this happens, they come out with this statement that they use all the time that they don't want to comment on it because it's an ongoing investigation and they want to be fair and they don't want to influence the case. They don't want to influence a possible jury and the judges that are going to come after that. And so the agency will always state this, and then they will turn right around and talk to the press and tell them exactly what they want them to know. They turned right around in this one and said, "Oh, the shooting was a result of agents being attacked by rocks, and that the agents reportedly ordered those in Mexico to stop throwing the rocks, but only when their orders were ignored did the agent shoot into Mexico to get them to stop throwing the rocks." And then the spokesperson from the Border Patrol went on further to state that the investigation was being done by independent investigators of the FBI and the Sonora, Mexico State Police. There was no mention that the illegal critical incident unit handled the evidence identification and collection for the FBI in this case. The framing of investigations as impartial and independent is the most important thing in these cases. And you will find it in every single case. This is the first step. Step 1, control that narrative. So like in investigations like these, whether or not a case goes to court or whether it succeeds in prosecution depends heavily on whether the evidence was secured by a legal forensics team. It depends on if the team identified every piece of evidence and how that evidence was collected and stored, and even if the chain of custody was complete. The Border Patrol critical incident team's lack of legitimacy and professional training caused every piece of evidence they touched to be compromised in the Jose Antonio case. If evidence is not identified properly, or if evidence is missed, if it's collected poorly or contaminated, or the chain of custody is not maintained, then prosecutors, the courts, and jurors cannot use that evidence in determining guilt. They just can't do it. You got to think back to O.J. Simpson. It's the same kind of thing. Only this time, these teams are doing it intentionally because the person that they're wanting to protect is a fellow agent. So on the following day and every news article after that, Border Patrol officials repeated that they did not want to talk about the case for fear of influencing the investigation and potential jurors. Yet each and every time they turned right around and talked openly about the case to the media, spreading false information about the victim. The second article in the Arizona Daily Star quoted agents as saying Jose Antonio was, quote, suspected of throwing rocks. The Border Patrol continued to influence the case among the press and public by using the agency's union. The Border Patrol has long done this, where they use their union members to go on television and on the radio and in print media and tell the story that the Border Patrol wants the case to be about. In the Jose Antonio case, just 5 days after the killing, Border Patrol agent and union representative Art Del Cueto was quoted as saying to the media in regard to this case, quote, "Rocks can kill you." I'll remind you again, no Border Patrol agent has ever been killed by a rock being thrown at them. As the criminal trial dragged on year after year, the union's vice president at the time was Sean Moran. He was concerned the trial was, quote, a political prosecution. And then, of course, the very next month, October in 2015, Art Del Cueto stands on the steps of the courthouse and repeats these claims of political prosecution. So that's the very first step in these cases, is controlling the narrative. It's set out by the significant or serious incident reports, the use of force reports. Those then go to the union and to the press information office, and those officers, those agents, I should say, are then told this is what you can say, this is what you can't say, and then they hit the media hard, and that's what you see here. And you will see this in every single time. So next, let's look at the actual critical incident response to this. The team members at this time, they were identified as Supervisory Border Patrol Agent Katie Seimer, Supervisory Border Patrol Agent Javier Dominguez, Border Patrol Agent Gerardo Carranza, and additionally, Tucson sector maintains several different types of critical incident teams. Like I said on the last podcast where I was talking about the Government Accountability Office's report, an investigation on what the critical incident teams were, where they said, oh, there are no other reincarnations of this. No. Here's an example of this. Here's another team called the Evidence Collection Team. And on the Evidence Collection Team, an ECT at this time, was a Border Patrol agent by the name of Moore. And he claimed that he actually was the training instructor for the Tucson, Arizona critical incident teams. It's important to note that Agent Moore's authority and training was not even addressed in the investigation nor the trial. All of the Border Patrol critical incident team's actions were accepted by the Arizona District Federal Judge Rainer C. Collins, who did a lot of these trials and simply accepted these critical incident teams as if they were legitimate. It was accepted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Arizona, and it was accepted by the jurors in both criminal trials as fact and as legal without any question whatsoever. So according to the report from the Border Patrol, the shooting happened around 11:27 p.m. At 11:45 p.m., the critical incident team supervisor is notified, and they stated that they would also notify CBP's internal affairs. That was a small unit that was later basically kind of rolled into CBP's OPR. But essentially, the investigation gets done by the critical incident team and the FBI. So the very first evidence team to arrive is the illegal and secret Border Patrol critical incident team, and they arrive at 1 a.m. according to these documents. That means that the shooter and the agents who work with the shooter and party with the shooter and had probably gone to the academy with the shooter and see the shooter as one of his family have the scene for an entire 90 minutes. About an hour and a half they have it. While agents on the scene waited for the critical incident unit to show, Senior Border Patrol Agent Roy Pierce took it upon himself to wrap the scene on the U.S. side with yellow caution tape. He identified and marked bullet casings and took pictures of the scene where Jose Antonio's body laid on the Mexican side. In courtroom testimony, Agent Pierce stated that he had been trained in evidence preservation, and although he did not specifically mention the critical incident team, this is the only unit that trains agents in such tactics within the U.S. Border Patrol. While Agent Pierce's actions that evening were not technically illegal, and although he bragged on the stand about having evidence preservation training and skills, he still failed to preserve the scene when he, the expertly trained crime scene investigator, drove through the scene and ran over the evidence. Video later revealed that Agent Pierce, as well as many other agents, drove through the crime scene repeatedly. They also were recorded running through the area where shell casings and rocks that had been alleged to have been thrown at the agents were located. Let's hear from their own mouth, from their own testimony, what it is these teams did if they were just supposed to help supplement things from time to time when there were no investigators available, which is what the Government Accountability Office just claimed. What is it that they were supposed to do? Well, let's see. According to Border Patrol agent and critical incident team agent Gerardo Carranza, he stated that critical incident team, quote, investigated and collected forensic data in regards to shootings, use of force incidents, collisions, things like that, anything the Border Patrol deemed to be critical, and there might be some media attention or somebody was hurt, injured, or killed. This statement demonstrates that the critical incident team's reach is very long, and it shows you how often that they're used within Tucson sector. In regard to his training, critical incident team agent Carranza stated that he had taken one class in Florida, but that most of his forensics training was, quote, on the job. So that means he's being trained by other Border Patrol agents. This conversation right here, this testimony that you're seeing, that's the only vetting of the critical incident teams that were done in this trial by the judge and the court. Agent Carranza further testified that when he and the critical incident team supervisor, Agent Simer, arrived at the scene, they spoke with the incident supervisor, Supervisory Border Patrol Agent Leo Cruz Mendez. Supervisor Cruz Mendez had traded guns with Agent Schwartz immediately after the shooting and then gave the gun used to kill Jose Antonio to Agent Carranza. Whatever evidence was on the gun during the shooting had been contaminated by Supervisor Cruz Mendez handling the gun. Critical incident team agent Carranza further stated that the rocks thrown at the agents were identified by the agents involved in the incident and were gathered and placed together by those same people involved in the evidence. And this further contaminated the evidence. What this means is that the critical incident team unit allowed those involved in the shooting to dictate what was evidence and what was not evidence. This is inconsistent with all professional evidence collection techniques. And this evidence that they collected can now no longer be used to convict somebody. To document the scene on the U.S. side, critical incident team agents used a total station forensics program that was purchased through the Department of Homeland Security for the critical incident team. Total Station is a 2D and 3D laser imaging system that can document evidence and its location more accurately, but only if it's used correctly. The data obtained that evening on the scene was taken back to the Border Patrol Critical Incident Team office in Tucson, where Agent Carranza then made a diagram. So this evidence isn't even going to the FBI. They're allowing the Critical Incident Team Border Patrol agents to then further analyze the data. This is just so wrong and so illegal, it's not even funny. Okay, so he makes a diagram. It was then that he realized that he had missed some of the shell casings because they failed to use the total station correctly. Critical Incident Team Agent Carranza then admitted to estimating the location of the missing evidence and changing the diagram based off of still pictures. So some of the evidence is identified according to this total system laser thing and is considered accurate, and other pieces that are on there was not. And then they just kind of guesstimated about where they were. But on cross-examination by Border Patrol's own union attorneys who know that the critical incident teams are not very good teams and that they mess up the evidence constantly, on that cross-examination, critical incident team agent Carranza admitted that his only training on the total station was, quote, on the job training, unquote, by a more senior agent who also did not have the legal authority to conduct the investigations. In courtroom testimony, Critical Incident Team Agent Carranza admitted there was no class provided for this mechanism, this tool, no amount of time needed to become efficient, or any official test to prove that they were proficient in operating total station. You see this over and over and over again, especially in Tucson sector with these attorneys. Typically, it's Sean Chapman and Jaime or Jim Calle. And, I mean, they're not doing anything wrong in that they're defending their clients and stuff. I get that. But it's just mind boggling to watch these two attorneys use the Border Patrol's critical incident teams and their failures and their illegality, everything that they do, to then turn around and get their Border Patrol clients off. It's almost as if it was planned that way. Critical Agent Carranza further admitted on cross-examination that he and Agent Seimer assumed that the rocks and shells they documented on the scene had not been moved, even though he could not prove that the agents had not moved any of the evidence during the 90 minutes it took for him to arrive on the scene. Agent Carranza was eventually forced to admit during his testimony that most of the evidence had been contaminated by the Border Patrol agents involved in the shooting only after Union attorneys showed the video of trucks and agents driving through the goddamn crime scene. He had to show it to him in court and in front of the jurors to get this guy to finally admit, that evidence could have been contaminated. Just unbelievable. So now let's look at the FBI response. CBP and Border Patrol repeatedly told the press that the killing of Jose Antonio was being investigated by the FBI and the Sonoran State Police. Now, it's important to note that the Tucson FBI at the time had its own evidence response teams. While the FBI evidence and forensic teams follow the international guidelines and standards and have their labs and forensic tools calibrated and evaluated yearly by certified inspectors, the same cannot be said of the Border Patrol critical incident teams. FBI Special Agent Michelle Terwilliger stated in courtroom testimony that the FBI always used the critical incident teams when Border Patrol was involved. As the testimony shows, FBI Agent Terwilliger believed that she was in charge of the Border Patrol critical incident teams, even though she was not a part of the Border Patrol command and had no legal authority over them. After being notified of the incident, Agent Terwilliger claimed she spoke with the critical incident team agents on the phone and told them they could start marking evidence and using the total station imaging device before she arrived. The FBI used the corrupted evidence of these critical incident team members to write their reports. I think it's really important to pause and note that what I'm saying here is the FBI in Tucson, Arizona has for decades used illegal Border Patrol critical incident teams' work, their evidence, their analysis to do all these cases for like 30 years. These consistent quote unquote failures are actually policies and protocols of the critical incident teams and did not appear to ever be a concern for the FBI nor their investigators. In fact, FBI agent Terwilliger arrived on the scene nearly 2.5 hours after the shooting. That's 50 minutes behind the critical incident team unit, who was also coming from the same area. Her testimony was that the critical incident team simply helped her identify evidence, but that she was the one in charge of the investigation in the scene. She claimed she was the one who personally picked up all the evidence and secured it, but upon further questioning, she admitted finally that the Border Patrol critical incident team took custody of the gun, that they did the imaging, and that they had the wrappings from the drug bundles that were found. So, no, FBI agent Terwilliger did not personally pick up and handle and package all of the evidence as she claimed. During cross-examination, FBI agent Terwilliger was forced to admit that she was not there for most of the investigation. She had zero oversight into what the illegal critical incident teams were doing. It was the critical incident teams who identified and marked what was evidence and what was not. And FBI agent Terwilliger simply showed up at the end and collected the evidence that those involved in the shooting had claimed was evidence, and that their coworkers, acting as critical incident team agents, had marked as evidence. As shown here, FBI agent Terwilliger further stated that she requested the Border Patrol critical incident team agents obtain the videos from the cameras along the wall on the evening of the shooting. A week later, on the 18th, a Border Patrol spokesperson told a reporter that, quote, video cameras on the border fence were operational during the event, unquote. And this marks the first time that Border Patrol officials admitted cameras were working when Jose Antonio was killed. The next mention of videos would not come for 2 years later as the investigation continued. In 2014, reporter Ben Ortega asked CBP what happened to the videos. CBP refused to respond. In November of 2015, CBP and Border Patrol admitted there were 2 videos of the shooting captured on their cameras. Judge Collins placed protective orders on both of these videos obtained by the critical incident team, forever keeping the videos out of the press and banned from public viewing. In an interview dated January 6, 2016, former CBP Internal Affairs Commissioner James Tomczyk stated that he had seen the videos of Jose Antonio's killing. According to former Commissioner Tomczyk, the video showed the 2 men with their bags of weed as they crossed the fence and went north. The 2 Nogales PD officers simply watched the smugglers dump the bags and cross back into Mexico. That's contrary to what was told to the reporters by the press information officers and by the Border Patrol Union, who stated that they all had to run in fear for their lives. That's not apparently what happened. It wasn't until 5 years after the shooting of Jose Antonio in March of 2017 that the family, the court, and the public were told that the Border Patrol had, quote, either lost or destroyed the videos, unquote. In Agent Swartz's attorney filings, the Border Patrol critical incident team agents claimed the videos were, quote, too compressed to clearly see the incident, unquote. According to the article, the FBI never bothered to try and obtain the original videos until 2015, 3 years after the killing. As the case progressed, the only videos used were the compressed copies, which greatly reduced the visibility for the jurors. I cannot stress this enough as a former agent. Video failures are a feature in critical incident team cases. They are not an anomaly. Whenever there is video, Border Patrol will leave it in the machine so that it is automatically rewritten over, as they did in the Anastasio Hernandez Rojas killing, or they will make copies that are then compressed, thus losing enormous amounts of data, and they then destroy the originals. This is seen time and time and time again. Compressed copies reduce the quality and the pixels, making the picture grainy and difficult to see. These types of so-called accidents occurred in the 1990s when I was an agent. This is critical incident team training, procedure, and policy. All right, so let's look at the Sonoran State Police response. This is going to be the response to Jose Antonio's body on the Mexican side. So the Sonoran State Police were notified of the killing at 11:32 p.m. according to Border Patrol's serious or significant incident report, and arrived on the scene at 11:35 p.m. According to the video and eyewitness testimony, the area around Jose Antonio was not secured. Many people were roaming around the scene, possibly even touching the child's body and moving it. Photos of the autopsy were lost, as well as the clothing Jose Antonio was wearing that night. So to say that the investigation by the Sonoran State Police and their medical examiners was not up to par, that's putting it mildly, but so is, quite frankly, the critical incident team response. So union attorneys rightly jumped on this poor performance, just as they did with the poor Border Patrol critical incident team performance. However, the attorneys on both sides failed to mention that the Sonoran State Police evidence collection team was trained by Tucson Sector critical incident team managers. This is clearly shown in former Border Patrol Assistant Chief John Buscaglia's LinkedIn profile, headed a binational course regarding critical incidents to Grupo Beta from Sonora, Mexico, and the Grupo Beta team from Baja California. Okay, so the Border Patrol does not have to worry about what the Sonoran State Police are going to find because they trained them. See how that works? Let's look at what expert forensic testimony was brought in from actual forensics experts. So, unlike the Border Patrol critical incident team agents who testified and were not required to give their bona fides and show their credentials and show that they were legal and all this other stuff, expert independent forensic analysis Gary Reaney was required by a court to go through his bona fides and provide evidence of all those skills. Reaney had a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in forensic science from George Washington University. All his training was certified and proven to the court, the attorneys, and the jurors. Reaney was even involved in helping write the International Forensic Standards, which all professional forensics groups follow, except, of course, the Border Patrol Critical Incident Team. Reaney found that the Border Patrol Critical Incident Team and the FBI agent, Michelle Terwilliger, failed to look under the cars for rocks or shell casings, failed to stop people and cars from destroying evidence, did not do any DNA testing on the rocks or marijuana bales and packaging, failed to interview those operating the cameras until much later, resulting in faded memories, failed to secure the original videos, failed to test for gunshot residue on the fence that would have enabled them to determine exactly where Agent Swartz was standing when he fired to help determine bullet trajectories and distance. They failed to operate the total station system correctly. In his words, they screwed it up, failed to document and interview witnesses other than Border Patrol agents. By the time that the criminal trial actually started in March of 2018, the national media was reporting over and over all the lies that the Border Patrol Union and spokespeople have spread that Jose Antonio was a member of a drug gang and all these other things. And the truth is, Jose Antonio had no arrest record either from Mexican authorities or from U.S. authorities. There was nothing in this kid's background to suggest he did what this agent said he did. And I think the thing that really affected it was the U.S. prosecutors in Arizona, who normally work with the critical incident teams and Border Patrol agents in other cases, against migrants, turned around and actually decided in the first criminal trial that they would admit that Jose Antonio was probably throwing rocks, even though they had no evidence to suggest that he was throwing rocks, none whatsoever. And in fact, there was a witness, Marco Gonzalez, who stated in 2012, when the shooting happened, he stated to the media that no investigators interviewed him and that he saw that Jose Antonio was not throwing rocks. There's another witness that wasn't interviewed named Isidro Alvarez. He was walking just 20 feet behind Jose Antonio when he dropped to the ground. And he spoke to the media several times and saying that this kid was not involved in that. He had nothing to do with it. But still, from 2 days out, the Border Patrol had set the narrative with the SIR report for the press information officers, the spokespeople, and the union to go forward and start floating rumors that this kid possibly was involved with drug smuggling, that he was throwing rocks at a Border Patrol agent, and he wasn't, not according to the witnesses. So here's some statements from the juror. If we think that illegal and unauthorized Border Patrol critical incident teams isn't a big deal and didn't affect that much, here you go. Jurors from the criminal trials, from both criminal trials, stated that the Border Patrol Critical Incident Team unit evidence identification and collection was so poor that they were forced into a hung verdict on the first trial. One juror stated that the problems with the evidence collection and integrity from the Mexican and the Border Patrol Critical Incident Team unit caused her to vote not guilty. In the end, neither the agent nor the agency were held criminally accountable for Jose Antonio's untimely death. The illegal and secret Critical Incident Team unit did its job that night, and they obstructed justice by contaminating everything they touched. This unit still continues today under CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility in their investigations, which is run by former Border Patrol agent Daniel Altman. So that is the Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez case. That's the story, and at least what the critical incident teams did to obstruct the justice. As you could see, they don't have to get rid of everything. They just have to contaminate some evidence. They just have to run over a little bit of evidence, fail to gather evidence, make some accusations, make them over and over in the press so that they repeat it enough. Prosecutors have to, this is quite honestly, this is the reason why a lot of prosecutors don't take these cases. You look at how the evidence is, you look at how they contaminate it. You don't want that. You're going to lose that case. The U.S. government may not want you all to know the truth about these teams, but I want you to know the truth about these teams.